Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. This time out, we're taking a look at the latest version of iZotope's Ozone, their mastering software. Let's get started. Today we're looking at version 10 of iZotope's Ozone software. Now, Ozone has been around for a number of years. It's super popular for creating masters of all sorts of different music. There have been a lot of enhancements in version 10. New modules have been added, powerful new features. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's dive right in. iZotope has taken a look at pretty much everything in Ozone. It's been a 3-year process. We have a more streamlined user interface. We've got native compatibility with Apple Silicon. We've got lots of enhancements, but let's start out by looking at new modules and new features in modules in Ozone 10. Let's begin by looking at Stabilizer. So Stabilizer is an intelligent and adaptive EQ. What it means by that is it actually looks at the incoming audio and adapts what it's doing as far as the EQ goes to what's happening on that input. So let's take a look here. It's a little easier to see and hear than it is to actually explain. Now, what we have is a very simple EQ as far as the user interface goes. It's basically doing everything using artificial intelligence. So if we play our track back, I'm going to gain match so that when we bypass, we get the same level as when we're processing. If I bring up the EQ amount, let's jump this up to about 80%. You can see we're getting a boost here, we're getting a little bit of a cut, a little bit of a boost on the low end, but you can also see that that curve is bouncing around because it's adapting the EQ it's applying to the incoming signal. Now it does this based on these two controls down here. Speed determines how fast it reacts to the incoming audio. If we turn that down, we get a much slower response. And if we turn that up, we get very fast response. So let's set that back to about 50. That seems to be a good middle ground setting. And the other control is smoothing. Now this basically determines the resolution, or I guess you could think of it as the number of bands of EQ that are being applied in sort of a broad sense. So if we turn that down, we're getting just a few bands of EQ processing. But if we turn that up, we're getting much more resolution. So again, let's bring that back to about 50 for middle ground. Now if we bypass, that's applying a nice EQ curve to our track. So what's happening in the background is artificial intelligence is targeting a particular profile or a particular target that it's trying to match our audio to. They call this tonal balance or matching. We can choose the target here. What iZotope has done is gone and looked at the top 10 chart worldwide. So these are the top 10 hit makers or hits on those charts, and they've averaged those to create each of these different targets for different genres. So we were in all-purpose before. If we jump to rock, you can hear it's a much more dramatic processing. If we go to, say, jazz, it's a very different sounding EQ curve. Let's go back to all-purpose. Now we also can set the amount of processing that's applied in the 3 different frequency bands here. It's broadly split into bass, middle, and treble, or lows, mids, and highs. So we could bring down the amount of EQ that's being applied on the bottom end. Finally, let's go back to our rock setting here. I like that, but you can hear how much extra snap is being added onto the snare drum. Let's tame transients. That's this switch down here that allows you to smooth out the response on those fast transient signals. You can really hear how that affects the transients, particularly on the snare and the hi-hat. One other thing that I want to point out with the stabilizer module is that's delta. Now delta allows us to just listen to the frequencies that are actually being processed. This can be very helpful in allowing you to dial in on exactly what needs to be worked on. Our next module is impact, which iZotope calls a microdynamics control module. Basically, it's a compressor and an expander, but it works on microdynamics, meaning almost individual notes, if you will, rather than broadly the way that a normal compressor would. So we can actually push sliders up to expand the signal or to increase the dynamics, or we can pull them down to compress or reduce the dynamics. And we can do that over 4 different frequency bands here: low, low mid, and highs. So you can see how that's being processed here. And the interesting thing is that we're not just applying an expander or a compressor. An envelope is actually being applied, and you can set that to a rhythmic value. Now this enhances the feel, the motion, and basically the rhythm inside your track as well. You can see when we pull down, we're compressing the signal. Now we can do this individually per band. So let's try setting something like this up, where we're compressing on the bottom end and expanding on the top end. We can bypass individual bands. We can also solo individual bands. So again, this allows you to really hear what's happening with the processor. Now, a couple other things here. We can set all these back to 0 by holding the option and clicking. And there's auto gain control, and we can also move all the bands simultaneously or gang them together. Now, if we push those all up, the auto gain control will operate on all that. You can see our line went down here. You can really hear the difference between the compression and the expansion there. Compression tends to smooth everything over, make it a little bit more monodynamic, if you will. That's a new word, monodynamic. Or we can push things up and expand everything and increase that sense of dynamics, that sense of motion within the mix. So this is a very powerful tool for both enhancing the dynamics as well as controlling the dynamics in your mix. Now let's move on to a module that's been in Ozone for a while. That's Imager. And Imager allows us to affect the width of our mix. We can either make it wider, or in fact, we can bring it back and make it more mono. And the thing is, when you bring it in mono, you lose some of that outside information. That might be ambience, it might be hard pan signals. So what's new in Imager is recover sides. And this is a function that allows you to bring some of that outside information into your mono signal to keep the life, to keep the punch, to keep the detail there. Once again, it's a little easier to hear than it is to actually describe. So I'm going to set up a 4-band system here. We'll set up lows, low mids, high mids, and highs. And we've got a slider for each of those. Now we can choose to make it wider, in which case we can actually stereoize or increase the width, or we can pull down in this direction, and in that case we can recover that side information and bring it in. So let's begin by just soloing the bottom end in our track, and we'll move that slider and see what happens when we stereoize and when we recover the sides. So you can really see what's happening here in the vector scope. Now our low frequencies are already fairly mono, so we're not getting a big difference there. But if we start to process some of our higher frequencies and our higher mids while making our lows and our low mids a bit more monophonic, and yet we're going to bring some of that side information back in, what's happening there is the width is being increased in the mid and high frequencies, but we've really tightened up the bottom end and made it even punchier. And again, by recovering the sides, we brought some of that information in to bring even more punch to it. But this effect is even more dramatic when we go to a fully mono mix. So let's pull these all the way down so that everything is completely mono. Let's set this back to 0, basically 1 dB. So basically a mono mix there. Now if we recover the sides, let's push this all the way up. You can hear that that outside information is coming in, and what's most apparent is the delay effect on the lead guitar. When we have this set to just a basic mono mix with no side recovery, the delay is really in the background, but if we push this up, you can really hear what that recover sides effect is doing. Our next module is one that's also been in Ozone for a while, and that's Maximizer. There's a new feature in Maximizer that's very cool, and that's this soft clip feature. That wasn't in Ozone before, but with Ozone 10 it's been added, and it's very powerful. Soft clipping adds basically distortion. There's harmonic content that's added in that helps to boost the volume up. It also adds detail and richness depending on how you set it. There are 3 different types of clipping here. There's light, there's medium, and there's hard, and we're going to step through those. So let's turn on soft clipping, and I'll bring it up here in the medium setting so we can hear the effect of it. You can hear that's really pumping up our mix, but it's also bringing it to life. It's just more lively, has more presence. It's just more jumping out of the speakers at you, if you will. Now let's step through the 3 different types of clipping and hear what they do. So of course hard clipping is the most dramatic. It's adding the most processing to our signal there. It's also pushing our level up the most. So let's bring that back though to, well, let's drop it down to about 20% to where we're just adding enhancement to what's going on. So even with that small amount of hard clipping being added in, 20% is our setting here, you can still hear it lifts that whole mix up. A major enhancement in Ozone 10 is in the Mastering Assistant. Now the Mastering Assistant has been here for a while. Basically it's artificial intelligence. It looks at your mix and it determines what modules are needed and gives you sort of a starting setting to work from as far as creating a master of your mix. Now in the past you had to sort of answer questions and fill out a survey in order for a Master Assistant to then go in and look at your track and work with it. And that's all in the past. At this point, all we need to do is click the Master Assistant button, start our audio playing, So that's a huge change. With the new Mastering Assistant, not only are we matching the tonal balance or the tonal profile of these different targets, we're also matching the width or the stereo width, the dynamics using impact, as well as the level using Maximizer. So there's a lot going on here that wasn't in Ozone before, and this is groundbreaking technology to be able to work on all 4 of those parameters simultaneously. Now the Mastering Assistant is actually smart enough to look at and choose the appropriate target. So it's put us into the rock genre here. But we could also switch this to another target if we like. So we could go to, say, jazz. Or EDM. A new one is cinematic, which is based off of the audio that's in movies. Now there's a lot going on under the hood here, and we can jump to detail view to see what's actually happening. We have 6 modules that Ozone has chosen to apply for us here: an EQ, stabilizer, impact, imager, dynamic EQ, and maximizer. Let's go ahead and bypass all these. We'll bring them in one at a time so we can hear what each is contributing. So we'll start with our raw audio. So lots happening there. There are subtle things happening in some of the modules, and some, like Maximizer, are really doing a lot of work. And you can see we're adding that soft clipping here. We've got Impact, which is doing some compression actually on our different frequency bands. We've got Stabilizer, and it's applying the rock EQ curve to what's happening. So lots happening. Now if we jump back over here, we actually have scaling control over these different effects. So we can scale the width. We can move that overall up and down. We can scale what Impact is doing. We can scale the maximizer. Now the maximizer is actually interacting with this optimization over here. So we're optimized for streaming, meaning it's set for -10 LUFS. We could also set that to DJ player, which gives us a different target. Once we're there, we can now pull the level down. We also can scale the EQ, and we can scale stabilizer. So we have a lot of control right here in the very simple interface, the very streamlined interface that's available in the Mastering Assistant. One other thing we should mention, and that's that not only can we use the targets that iZotope has provided here, you can also load your own file in and use it as a target. So they can do the tone match, we can do the width match, dynamics match, and so on to match that exact song that you choose as the reference for your track. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Ozone 10. There's so much more we could talk about. Of course, we've barely scratched the surface of all the new features and things that are going on here. But with those new modules, the new features, the new capabilities, and the streamlined interface, it's so easy to create your own masters and to have them sound fantastic. Now there are two versions of Ozone 10. There's Ozone 10 Advanced, which we were looking at here. There's also Ozone 10 Standard, which has a few less modules and a few less features, but still perfectly capable of creating great sounding masters for you. Whichever you choose, you're going to get great results. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click here for more videos like this, or start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.